Good Wednesday evening. Thank you for joining us here on the Weather Junkies. I'm Tyler Jankowski, joining the show from Bristol, Connecticut, alongside Dakota Smith.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. It's a pretty chilly day in Colorado. We were in pretty much the teens all day today, and supposed to get a lot warmer tomorrow into the 50s, and then over the weekend, as much of the country is going to see a pretty big blast of cold air. I think right now we're forecast to get down to the negative teens on Saturday, I guess Saturday night, Sunday morning. So crossing my fingers our pipes don't burst here. We're in a new place, pretty old house, and we're a little worried about that. How's the weather on the East Coast, Tyler?
It's seasonable right now, but we have our eyes on that blast of cold that arrives tomorrow, and the coldest day here in the next couple will be Friday morning when we have lows single digits above and below zero. Wind chill values will be 10 to 20 below zero, so it'll be cold. It's not quite record cold. The record will be 5 to 10 degrees away from what we're forecasting. I was going to say out of reach. I don't want to say out of reach because odd things can happen, and the bottom could fall out when you don't expect it. But I don't think we're going to be seeing record cold, but it will be very cold. And when you look at the cold and it's going to be really cold and you realize that it's not going to set a record, it kind of puts things in perspective. But
Did you get any snow with that storm that went through? Was it yesterday?
we had several inches on Monday morning. It was about an inch or less along the shoreline, up to maybe 4 inches in the northwest part of the state. So it was a small storm, but we did get snow.
I saw a pretty cool video of that squall line that went through Pennsylvania. State College looked like they got a nice couple inches of snow real quick.
Yeah, it is. It is that time of year, and there's nothing like snow squalls in Pennsylvania. So I didn't see that particular clip, but we've had some snow here and there, and we have, I believe, it's 4.5 inches on the season. I can't remember when I looked that up, if it was yesterday or before the storm, but we're right on average. And last winter we didn't get snow till right before the new year, so we're 4.5 inches ahead of last year at this point.
I think we're pretty close right now. My location and your location to snowfall in the year. I think we're right around 5, and that's below average for us.
Yeah, I would think it is.
That's interesting.
But yeah, so it's a blast of cold, and then we have storms. Everyone wants to know if it's going to be a white Christmas. I think the prospects of that are quite low. Right now we have like a dusting here and there in my yard, but it seems like every storm for the next 2 weeks goes from snow to mix to plain rain, and a decent number of the storms that are being modeled actually go west of Connecticut. So even though we have a blast of cold here and there, the storm track doesn't look favorable for the foreseeable future. So it'll be interesting to see if that changes or not. But I know, at least if you looked at the forecast from the government for the winter, it kind of looked like a storm track to the west, not over the ocean. So at least right now, that's jiving with that. But as we know, these things change through the course of the winter. So, but right now, it doesn't look that impressive for snow in the next 2 weeks, I should say.
I like how you said the forecast by the government. People rarely say it like that, and it's exactly what it is, though. So,
well, I can't think of the official name. There's so many acronyms. I think it comes from the Climate Prediction Center, right? But then it's so important that the Weather Service actually releases it.
Yeah, it probably is the Climate Prediction Center for the temperature and precip anomalies, month out, 8 to 14 days out. Anyways. If you notice, it's a special Wednesday show. We have an obligation tomorrow. Can't make the show tomorrow, so we're doing it tonight. But we are doing a kind of a recap of the weather of 2016 and some of our more popular and enjoyable episodes this year. So we'll talk about a little bit of that. But first, let's do the tweets of the week and getting in the trending in the Weatherverse segment. Before we jump into what we had lined up, we had a tweet in from JP Kalb And he said, tweet of the year for weather, El Nino was just like the presidential election. Very unexpected results, especially with the rain. That's funny. So thanks, JP, for that.
So we have a loaded slate of tweets this week. A lot of exciting and in different topics. The first one revolves around the polar vortex. How could we not include a tweet about that? It comes from Ryan Maui. We've used tweets from him before, but he's a meteorologist. Everyone knows him for his work at Weatherbell and the eye-catching graphics that he builds. His tweet says, you may be hit by at least 2 lobes of the polar vortex during the next 5 days in the Midwest and the Northeast. Hashtag polar vortex. His animation shows 2 blobs of purple moving over the country. The blobs of purple, obviously indicative of very cold air. And it was just a few years ago that polar vortex became a popular term. And I don't think many people have a full understanding of it, but I try to improve my understanding all the time. And indeed, it is what I thought initially. The definition of vortex is spinning, right? So the polar vortex spins around the North Pole. It would be inaccurate to say the polar vortex is going to hit the Northeast or hit Pennsylvania or hit Connecticut or Colorado for that matter. It's simply when that weakens, when the flow around the North Pole weakens, you can have lobes of the polar vortex, and Ryan referred to it in his tweet as a lobe. The lobe that kind of like a worn out rubber band maybe. And then the cold is allowed to come south, move farther away from the pole. And the true polar vortex is up in the stratosphere, many, many miles above our heads, though it comes closer. The stratosphere comes closer when it's really cold. And the stratospheric polar vortex is linked to the tropospheric polar vortex. So they're linked, and when it weakens, you get blasts of cold that come south. But it would be inaccurate to say the whole thing moves over the United States.
That was a nice little weather 101 with Tyler Jankowski.
Well, as you know, I like to understand things, and even if it may seem simple or beneath someone with a degree, I like to have that firm grip, the simplistic overall view. I think I got that from Nice. And I think it's important to understand that. So, even though it looks like these blobs of cold have some spin to them, that is not the entire polar vortex.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird how terms like this pop up and catch a lot of, get into a lot of headlines, and then they end up being misused. And then it seems like the weather community then puts it on itself to make sure that people are actually understanding what each term is. Like, I don't know, Godzilla El Nino. When that
it is interesting though. I feel like even though this is happening, there's been less of a blow up in the media, especially the national media. Maybe the term wears off after 2 years.
I think you're right. No, it does seem to catch
now it's time to come up with something new.
That's something that already exists, but no one talks about.
All right, that's enough for one tweet.
We'll move on to our next tweet here from the National Weather Service. You can follow them at NWS, and their tweet says, "Dreaming of a white Christmas? Look up your historical odds with this interactive map." And they have a nice picture here of their map, and I actually like the color display here. They have a nice little Santa hat on their logo. But I actually have never used something like this because I don't know. I don't really care what my statistical chance of getting a white Christmas is.
Well, you're out where they get snow all the time. At least that's what Easterners think.
Yeah, if I was a little higher, that would definitely be true.
But yeah, this appears to be new. The date on the website here says December 12th, 2016, but basically that amazing map that you always see on Google Images or anytime you Google White Christmas, it's a beautiful map, but you can never zoom in. You can never actually see for your town. You have to kind of guess based on the scale. And now you don't have to do that anymore because there's an interactive map. You can actually zoom in, and I think these are co-op sites, cooperative weather observing sites. There's also, the main the main climate sites that have more robust data sets, but there are definitely sites included in here that may not have the best records, but they at least give you an idea of what a ballpark estimate may be for a white Christmas. So if I zoom into Connecticut, for example, the highest we have is in the Northwest. At a reliable site, it's actually set, it's probability of 1 inch of snow. That's the definition of a white Christmas, at least on this website. A 72% chance in the hill towns of Connecticut, and you go down to the shoreline and it's an 18%. So it's a big difference within an hour's drive. And the highest, there's high 90s, mid to high 90s in New England. I think Mount Washington is 94, I want to say. I'm trying to click here. Yeah, Mount Washington has a 94% chance of an inch or more on Christmas. So that's just a sampling of us in New England.
Yeah, Fort Collins has a 34% chance, and that's pretty much the same throughout the entire Front Range. But then you move just 25 miles, 30 miles west into the mountains, and it's a 99% chance because the high country is always covered in snow essentially this time of the year. But no one lives up there, so
your old stomping grounds here. It says Westminster.
Oh yeah, I live just south of Westminster.
16%, and then DC a paltry 6% at the National Arboretum.
Looking at State College here, 23% chance.
And then on the beautiful ridge line just to the west, Snowshoe and Johnstown, much higher probabilities. But anyways, it's a fascinating map. If you don't have the link, we can tweet it out at some point before Christmas, right?
Yeah.
Our next tweet comes from the NOAA Climate account, and it's an animation of sea ice over the decades. This is at NOAA Climate, and it's a movie that they uploaded to Twitter. Movies on Twitter are beautiful nowadays, if you didn't know. But it goes from, let's see, says oldest ice. I'm not sure what year. 1990. So it starts at 1990, and it animates fairly quickly to the current day. And you can see the jiggling of the ice and the seasonal variations. But ultimately, as you get closer to the present day, there's less ice up there on the North Pole. This is the North Pole. And there's a link with more information. Have you seen this before?
This is beautiful. My gosh. I don't think I haven't seen this particular one. I've seen versions of this. Zach Labe does a nice version of this. But this is stunning. I'm trying to figure out where the data is from. But one thing that sticks out to me is kind of the slushing of ice out, I guess, north of Greenland every year. It does like a wobble in the center there, and then slushes out. Wildlife
and the people. It says the data's from the University of Colorado. Mark, there's a guy named Mark.
I was trying to figure out the instrument and
how they measure the sea ice.
Yeah,
I think at the end it says to estimate sea ice age. Well, at least the age part. Stupid Twitter video. Pause. To estimate sea ice age, scientists combine NOAA and NASA satellite observations of ice locations and extent with buoy data on winds and motion.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen this video, go check it out at NOAA Climate, climate.gov. One thing I wanted to say about the Arctic sea ice and the Antarctic sea ice, a lot of people use it as kind of this, the 2016 minimum of sea ice as a kind of a metric of where climate is. But from the talk I had a couple episodes ago, I got from it that it was mainly weather driven, that this minimum that we're in now for Arctic sea ice was mainly due to weather. And yes, overall sea ice is is melting, and over a long period of time, we're losing sea ice. But to look at 1 year and use that as a kind of a climate tool, a tool to describe where the climate is, it doesn't do it, all the justice. I seem to see it a lot, and I think it's interesting that it's mainly the weather pattern that's set up. Weather, climate, it's all kind of related. But
Well, we're coming off a strong El Nino, one of the strongest.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that certainly had a big part in it. But when I talked to shoot, I can't remember her last name.
It was just a few. Was it Julianne? Starts with an S.
Strova. Yeah, Julianne, Dr. Strova. Yeah, and when I asked her, why are we in this minimum in 2015 for sea ice, she didn't mention anything about El Nino or global warming. She mentioned the weather patterns that were set up that were favorable for melting sea ice, and that was it. She then went on to say over a long period of time we're losing ice and it's getting thinner and younger, but today, right now, it's mainly due to the weather pattern that exists.
Our next tweet is a series of 2 posts. First is a Twitter post. The second is a follow-up Facebook post. The subject is crap app. What a great phrase. The tweet comes from James Spann, and he tweeted it earlier today, and it's a link to his blog, The Crap App Dilemma, and it's on alabamawx.com. And Dakota, you want to explain what his post is about?
Yeah, so basically he's reviewing the iPhone weather app, the standard one, and he shows what it's telling for Birmingham, Alabama, because that's where his audience is, and that's where he broadcasts and forecasts from. And he says, it gives you the temperatures and kind of a little picture of what to expect, sun or rain. But then he says the weekend weather is very complicated, and this app gives you no clue to what actually could happen. He mentioned that there's a risk of strong storms in West Alabama Saturday night, and then there's going to be a dramatic change in temperature, as we kind of mentioned earlier. There's going to be a kind of a national blast of cold air that's going to get all the way down to Alabama even. And he mentions it'll probably be close to 70 degrees early Sunday and then crashing into the 30s by Sunday afternoon. And so basically his point is that this app just simplifies all that, and it doesn't give you some of the info that you need. It really just gives you a broad brush general overview and doesn't do the forecast justice. I think he's right, but I think so. There was a follow-up to this that I'll actually, there are a couple follow-ups. I'm going to talk about Becky's follow-up. Becky Elliott, she's a contributor to Weather Ready or Not, and she works for AccuWeather. And she had an issue with the term crap app. And she mentions that she understands where James Spann's coming from. He's a giant in the field, and he's obviously wise and knows what he's talking about when it comes to this. But she mentions that weather apps do provide a good information sometimes, and they provide push notifications for National Weather Service, weather watches and warnings. It's just another source of weather information that it can be viewed, not the only source of weather information, and so yeah, she might be writing something about it at some point, but she did write a nice little I don't know, it's like in the iPhone note application, and she wrote kind of her feelings about it. I don't know. So Spann has some apps that he recommends, like a weather decision technology app, RadarScope, which is also a WDT app, and yeah, I don't know. Is crap app the best way to call it? Probably not. Tyler, I'll let you. You had another follow up to this, right, Tyler?
I think I'm an Apple fan. I love Apple, and I spend way too much money on Apple products. But the weather app is terrible that they have there. It's beautiful, it looks great. It's pleasing, but in terms of what it provides, it's terrible. I mean, I don't really click on it. I probably should just to get a sense for what it does, but it has a lot of single icons and a lot of single numbers. It looks like it has text. I don't know what the text has on day 4, 5, 6, or 7, but unfortunately, I think a lot of people use the default app. Like when you say it's only one source of weather information, that's true, but unfortunately, I think a lot of people just use that. Our app that we have at the station, we put the forecast in, and we also type the description that we want. So if it's sunny, it probably says sunny. But if there's a storm, it has several sentences that describe what's going on. And the other thing is this default app here does not send push alerts from Apple. That doesn't send push alerts for severe weather warnings. But the follow-up to that app is an app made by the Weather Channel. And this was a post by a coworker of mine, Ryan Hanrahan. He posted this on Facebook with several paragraphs of text. It did very well on Facebook. It got 472 reactions and 26 shares and 111 comments. And the forecast, this is from last week. We talked about that snow that we got. We got a couple inches. The forecast from the Weather Channel said snow showers early with a steadier snow, 1 to 3 inches on Sunday night, and then on Monday, snow likely with 5 to 8 inches of snow, for a total of 6 to 11 inches. Most of us got 4 inches. No. Most of us got like 2 or 3 in the Hartford area. I think this forecast was for the Hartford area, and this was 4 days out. 4 days out, they were calling for 6 to 11 inches when it looked like a 1 to 3 event in the populated area of Connecticut. So I think that's the definition of crap. When people say that weather forecasters, meteorologists are wrong all the time, part of my rebuttal nowadays involves doctors being wrong. But more importantly, as it results to this conversation, I say, well, you're right if you use a bad app. You're right if you're getting your forecast from an unreliable source. You have to consider your source of the information. That statement originated in a day when meteorologists were wrong an awful lot. But unfortunately, it's being polluted nowadays by people looking at unreliable sources and then being wrong when t equals 1 minute from forecast time, simply because they're looking at apps that only rely on model data. So when you hear people say meteorologists are wrong all the time, that is coming a lot now from apps that we don't even control. So, but the fact that this was forecasting 6 to 11 inches 4 days out, and we got about 2 or 3, and we knew we were going to get like 2 or 3. It's not like it was a surprise. Is a problem. I don't know. Maybe it was just taking what the model said without averaging models. I don't even know how they do it, but it was way off and misleading.
Yeah, it's one thing. It's one thing when the app is just, I don't know, badly formatted, but it's another thing when it's giving you the wrong data.
I mean, I would love that as a kid. I would add up the numbers 6 to 11. I would take that forecast. That's the one I would want.
I'm sure many people did too.
But I think you understand what I mean when I say people say we're wrong all the time. Well, now they're getting their information from a lot of sources that we don't even control. So, so it's challenging because people need to understand that the field of meteorology has advanced a lot. They generally understand that, but they have to understand that we're right a lot of the time when it matters. And there are big blow-ups. There's a lot of egg on the face every once in a while. But it's not as bad as I think a lot of people chalk it up to be. And unfortunately, that's made more problematic by things like this.
Yeah, one thing I saw on social media was someone comparing how people share wrong weather forecasts, like a 300-hour GFS forecast map. And that's kind of similar to a weather app sharing data that's wrong or way out into the future and has no chance of verifying So I don't know. I like that analogy because it brings it back to something that we know exists outside of just weather apps. But
Anyways, that ends our app discussion for the Twitter segment, the bloated Twitter segment. We have a read of the week. This is my first read of the week. I've never done one of these, but I had to miss the show last week. Some important business to take care of, and I felt bad. So I did the read of the week, and it's very old. It's not modern. The title of the read of the week is A Method to Forecast Wintertime Instability and Non-Lake Effect Snow Squalls Across Northern New England. So Windex, the old timers call it Windex, and the paper is by Weir Lundstedt, and it was written in November of 1993, which would have made me 1 year, 3 months old. Not very old. So the paper is old, and it includes a lot of references to models that don't exist and a lot of things that don't even exist in forecasting anymore. But basically, the idea for including this revolves around our current weather. We're forecasting snow squalls on Thursday, but they're not necessarily lake effect driven. They're just snow squalls that can be very dangerous, and they form behind a cold front, along a cold front, and just behind a cold front when the air is really cold. It's like a thunderstorm in the summer, and you can get a couple inches. You can get 1 or 2 inches from these things. And so you can imagine how dangerous they can be, especially if the temperature is 35 and the squall comes through, you drop down to 32 or 31, a little bit of liquid ices over, then you get an inch on the top. So it's a big forecast challenge here in New England. And back in 93, this paper was written by Weir, and his findings were threefold. One is the T1 to T5 temperature. Whoa. What's T1 to T5? So apparently, from what I've heard, those things used to exist in the models. They were pretty important. It was a text value. T1 was the mean temperature between 1,000 and 965 millibars, so low, closer to the ground. And T5 was the mean temperature between 820 and 785 millibars, which is about, say, 6,000 feet up, maybe 7,000 or 8,000 feet up. So basically, it was a temperature difference. When that temperature difference was greater than 10 Celsius, when you had enough moisture in the low levels, relative humidity greater than 50%, and the lifted index, or the temperature difference between the surface and 500 millibars, when it increased by 8 or more in a 12-hour period, in other words, big time change in a short amount of time, when all of those things happened, there was a good chance for these non-lake effect snow squalls to occur. This is not currently put out by any weather models. There's no real maps that you can look at. It's sort of been replaced by the snow squall parameter. And the Weather Service office in Burlington, Vermont has a snow squall parameter in their local WRF output on their webpage. You can check that out. But also, if you look on the Storm Prediction Center, I think, the mesoanalysis, something like that. It might be the SREF or some kind of fancy application online. You can view the snow squall parameter as a forecast and get a sense for where snow squalls may hit. But the bottom line is it has to be moist. You have to have a rapid decrease in temperature, and you have to be well mixed, which basically means, we look at soundings, we look at the atmosphere. Temperature drops off fairly quickly as you get higher above the surface. All of that combines to generate some rising motion and some intense snow, and it could be deadly. It could be a big impact to the forecast. So I suggest you read that. We can tweet it out. It's a little old, a lot of outdated things, but the idea is there that people have studied this and you can learn something. And that's how Windex came about.
This is awesome, Tyler. I haven't read it all because I just saw as we're talking about it, but I'm definitely going to read this. It's pretty cool to read old weather research and just to see how far we've come. But knowing that laid the foundation for all the research that's been done in that area since then and up until now. So yeah, we'll tweet this out and we'll put it on the site if you want to check that out. So thanks, Tyler, for that.
You're welcome. Our main topic, yeah.
Yeah, let's move on to that. So I really just wanted to talk about some of the big weather events of 2016, maybe our favorite, maybe our most notable weather events, and maybe talk about some of our big episodes that we did along with that. So I want to start with the my favorite weather event of 2016, and also our most viewed show on YouTube. It's the exact same weather event, and that is the monster East Coast snowstorm in late January of 2016. I don't think I've been in a snowstorm like that ever in my life. I went back to the East Coast. I've said it many times, so you're probably tired of me saying it, but I went back to the East Coast from Colorado to Maryland to experience this because essentially we were at a lock to get 20 plus inches, and a lot of the models had even a higher limit. And so I was like, all right, I have to go do this. My backyard hometown's going to get this. So I got to go check it out. And along with that, we had Paul Cosin on. And it was merely a coincidence that we had him on that week to talk about one of the biggest snowstorms in a while. And, it was early on, so we had some technical issues. I must be honest about that. But it was our most watched show on YouTube. I think at one point we had 300 people watching live. And it was just, nothing beats listen to Paul Cosin talk about winter weather. That voice, his wisdom. I will never forget watching him as a kid and hoping that we're gonna get off of school and going through his busts and his good forecasts all in the same. So that was my favorite weather event, and coincidentally our most viewed show as well.
Yeah, we had to use FaceTime audio to make that work. Anyways, that was our most popular on YouTube, and we have other ways that you listen to this. You may be listening on iTunes or SoundCloud. Our second most popular was actually our first episode. This was before we had the idea of having guests on. And the title was The Past, Present, and Future of the Weather Channel. So we did not have a guest on for that show, but we actually did have a meteorological content producer, Dominic Ramuti, on the show many months after the first. But our first episode was November 4th, 2015, and it was a highly viewed one. But there was a lot of curiosity involved there. But that was a fun show. And
we did that show. We technically did that show twice because we did a dry run of it off air, just because we were new to the whole podcasting thing, and man, we should publish that just as a history of the Weather Junkies.
I don't even remember that we did that pre-show, but
that show did well, I think, because it was our first one, and I don't know, we're trying to make a splash. Our next most popular episode on YouTube was the more of a recent one, episode 26. So 26 episodes ago, midsummer, we had on Mark Ellenwood of U.S. Tornadoes to talk about the ethics of storm chasing. And that was a really good episode because it was during a time when there was a lot of conversation about some of the good and some of the bad of storm chasing. And it was nice to have him on as kind of a clear and concise voice on some of the issues.
Yeah, that was a great episode. I remember discussing whether or not you could legally stop people from storm chasing, and my viewpoint was no. We have to. Yeah. But anyways, that was popular, and it was at a time when there were storms going on, I think, so that definitely helped. The fourth most popular was another episode without a guest, I believe. It was episode 3, and this wasn't so much that it was an early episode, but it was about El Nino. It was titled Current Status and Impacts of El Nino, and we all know what happened with El Nino. It was one of the strongest on record after we did this episode. So there was a lot of interest. And of course, when anyone hears El Nino, they think snow and winter and will there be a lot of snow, and there must be a lot of snow and stuff like that. So it did really well. And
yeah, that was a fun episode. I was definitely out of my element trying to explain the impact of El Nino in Colorado, considered as my first El Nino here, and didn't really know what was going to happen, but we had a pretty big winter out here that year.
I actually just clicked through this El Nino episode, and this was back in the days when we would screen share tweets and actual data. It looks like I had an Excel sheet with the data. If you're listening and you miss those days, especially if you're a YouTube watcher, then feel free to send us a comment on social media and let us know, because it's something that I'd be willing to consider to bring back. I think we had some mishaps, and maybe I was on the receiving end of those, so I decided to not do that anymore, but I can see some value in that, so I would consider bringing it back.
There's a comment on here on that episode. Subliminal message at 20. Yeah, the picture of you that pops up.
Yeah, I was like, that's enough of that.
Yeah, I think we can consider doing it again. We'll see. That show had 142 views on.
At least on YouTube, but there's, as you say, there's more on the other platforms a lot of times. So
yeah, and something about that, it's hard to keep track of how many views it gets, because there's so many different podcast apps that people use to listen to podcasts, and I never know how accurate the stats that I am are getting. But our most popular episode on just through iTunes and through Stitcher and through Google Play is the National Park episode that we just recently did with Brian Kahn of Climate Central. Yeah, that actually got more than double, I think, our normal amount of views. I have no idea why. I maybe it's because it had national parks in the title. Maybe it's because Climate Central shared it a lot. But yeah, that's our best, our most viewed episode, and it's interesting because there was just a recent impact of can't really say climate change, but of weather in a big national park, the Smoky Mountains, when Gatlinburg got hit by that fire. So
our fifth most popular episode on YouTube was episode 10 last February, sharing weather information on social media with Matt Lanza.
That was a fun one.
Yeah, I think that conversation revolved around whether or not we should bash other people and should be nice, and the conflicts that erupt.
Yeah, and trying to, I don't know, the difference between enthusiast and certified and degreed, and what where the line is in discussing weather. And yeah, that was a fun episode. Any weather events in 2016, Tyler, that caught your attention, that you enjoyed the most, or surprised you the most? Maybe?
Yeah, definitely surprised. It would be the severe weather outbreak back in February. We discussed it on this show. We had the tornadoes down in Virginia, and we had wind gusts, I believe, over 60 miles per hour here in Connecticut. Widespread, not one or two, but widespread 60 mile per hour gusts after midnight in February. And there were tens of thousands of power outages across the state. And it was February, and we didn't really expect that because of the time of year. We had obviously a very low amount of snow last winter, so this makes sense that we had such an odd warm weather event in the winter. But I believe people were killed in the tornadoes down in Virginia, and I think it was quite an outbreak. I remember looking back in the historical tornado information to see. That's right, because I think a barn got blown over by a tornado in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So this was all in February. Remember that outbreak?
I do. Yeah, it was like the most tornadoes on a day in February for Pennsylvania or something.
Something crazy like that.
Yeah.
So that one's definitely the most surprising and fascinating. After that, I mean, there was nothing for me here in New England. There was not a whole lot of snow. I know we missed that storm you were talking about. And then in the summer, I think the summer was pretty quiet. There wasn't a ton of severe weather. We had a little weak tornado north of New Haven. Didn't really do a whole lot of damage, and that was the only one of the summer. There was no tornado warning on it, so we never had a tornado warning this summer.
Wow.
And we didn't actually know that was a tornado until about an hour after the fact. When it literally took an hour before we knew a tornado had hit.
Yikes.
So I guess you could say it was surprising, but it was so weak that it's not like people died in that, or there really wasn't a lot of damage. I don't think. A few trees came down, maybe a shed got knocked over. Other than that, I don't think there's the drought. I mean, the drought's the only other big thing.
Yeah, I was gonna mention probably the biggest headline in the weather world this year, and I'm trying to pick between Matthew and the record heat, because record heat was talked about a lot just throughout the entire year, but Matthew kind of stole the show for a solid 3 weeks there. The before, the during, the after, and still we haven't had a major hurricane make landfall in the United States. It's been over 10 years now, I believe. And Matthew made landfall, but was a Cat 2, got downgraded before making landfall, and was skirting the coast as a Cat 3, and.
Oh yeah, that's right. Because Matthew didn't make landfall until the Carolinas.
Yeah, and landfall is a very technical term. The center of the surface low pressure, the center of the eye, essentially has to be over land, whereas Matthew had a piece of the eye and a piece of the eye wall over land as a major hurricane, but never actually made landfall. And I think Matthew for me probably was the biggest headline, just because it was new for Florida, because they haven't had much activity in the past 10 years, and it was a lot of anticipation. Another thing that is very recent is the GOES-R launch. Not really a weather event, but certainly big for the weather community and the future of our forecasts. And there's a number of severe weather outbreaks that you could talk about.
I think overall tornadoes were down this year, though, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. I forget. U.S. tornadoes has the chart, but I think they were on average up to a point, and then it got to a certain point where there weren't any tornadoes, and it dipped down below average here. Let's see. I'm trying to. Well, I don't know if it's gonna. I don't think it's gonna be easy to find on U.S. tornadoes, but yeah, they have a tornado climate. Climo. Let's see. Yeah, never mind. Can't find the graphic.
Well, that about does it for our recap of 2016, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think we did it justice. I mean, you and I could just sit and talk about weather stuff forever, but I think we touched on the biggest events. We touched on some of our biggest episodes and the weather events surrounding them. So yeah, it was a great 2016. I got to thank everyone for listening to us and sticking with us. We're expanding in the new year. We're trying to add more episodes of Weather Ready or Not. And because of that, we have, you may have heard, we started a Patreon to get some help with the website hosting and podcast hosting sites and the cost associated with that. Last episode, I kept saying Patron, and it's Patreon. Over and over, I said Patron. And afterwards, Mark was like, it's Patreon, right? I was like, oh my gosh. So, but yeah. Anyways, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/the Weather Junkies. Even if it's just $1 a month, we'd really appreciate the help there. You'll see links in the description and on our website. But yeah, overall, great 2016, and hope you stay with us in 2017. Tyler, I think you have a little info on what you can expect next week and then in the beginning of the new year.
Absolutely. A great 2016, and we want to come back recharged in the new year. So with that in mind, we will not have a live episode in the next 2 weeks, but next week there will be a Weather Ready or Not recording podcast. So you can listen to that. No live show, though, in the next week. So we hope that you have a great Christmas, a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year, because we won't have a new live show until after the new year in that first week of January. And it is in that first week of January when we're excited to have Dr. David R. Coyle on the show. He works in a forest health and invasive species program at the Southern Regional Extension Forestry. We'll have him on January 5th, so that'll be the first live show of the new year. And until then, no live shows. And sometime in the future, we will have a collaboration with Weather Hype. Is that another podcast, Dakota?
Yeah, it's a podcast by Ben Fawn and Castle Williams. Yeah.
Perfect. So we have our guest, David Coyle. He'll be on the first week of January. We want to build out the slate of guests before we get there. So hopefully in the coming weeks, we'll have that slate lined up for the first couple of weeks in January. And maybe we'll announce some things on Twitter or Facebook. But that does it for this recap show. We hope you enjoyed this show and all the other episodes we brought you in 2016. As we said, have a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year and Happy Holidays. But that is all for us this week and in this year. So for Dakota and myself, thank you for listening, and we'll be back next year.